of the problem.
Arnie Gundersen is with Fairewinds Associates. And Arnie, I know that you have, for quite some time, for many years, been concerned about the integrity of containment vessels and the possibility of there being ruptures or cracks in such facilities. And there is another plant that has a very serious problem of this form at Crystal River, is there not?
Yeah, Progress Energy has problems in Florida. They were building the Levy County units, and they were scheduled to go online in 2016 for $5 million, and now they're 2026 for $25 billion. So it's gone up fivefold on the estimate and taken 10 more years to build. So, but on top of that, they have an operating unit called Crystal River, and they were going to replace the steam generators on Crystal River, just like at San Onofre. They decided that they were going to do it themselves. They didn't need experts. They had, but it's almost like having slept at a Holiday Inn Express or something like that. So they felt that they were qualified. So they decided they were going to do it themselves to save about $20 million and cut a hole in this containment. Now the hole is about 28 feet in diameter and about 4 feet thick, solid concrete and steel. And when they cut it, they noticed this crack, and they said, whoops, this is not good. And the crack turned out to be 60 feet long and more than 20 feet wide. And it's almost like the Firestone tires becoming delaminated. It was a crack like that.
It's not something you can fix with crazy glue.
No. No, absolutely. So they, this is in 2009, and now about 18 months later, they brought in every expert under the sun, and they tried to fix it with crazy glue. They made repairs to the crack, and then they started to tighten it back up, and it cracked somewhere else. And then they said, oh, my God, and they had to shut down again. And while they were shut down again, they cracked in a third place. So it looks like they'll be down for 5 years at least before they fix these cracks. And the question is, why don't they just knock it down and start fresh? And the problem is if the building is still there and you try to put the crazy glue on while the building's still there, the NRC will protect you and you don't have to go out for a new license. But if they knock the building down and start fresh, at that point the NRC starts the licensing clock up again, and they are terrified to try to relicense the plant. So it's 33 or 34 years old. Will be shut down for 5 years, and it's already applying for a 20-year license extension. But the people getting rich right now are the lawyers, because there's enormous damage claims. Crystal River is saying, well, it's an act of God, and we couldn't have foreseen this crack. And they're trying to go after their insurance carrier for $2 billion to repair it. So to save $20 million, it's cost somebody, likely the ratepayers in Florida, $2 billion to fix it.
One could say that nuclear is whack because of reactors on crack, but we won't. However, more seriously, what do you suspect is the hidden danger of embrittlement, crackage, and other maladies that occur with materials over long periods of time, particularly with nuclear reactors now being licensed well beyond their intended lifespan?
Boy, that's a great question. We have this thing called the bathtub curve in reliability engineering. And if you cut a bathtub in half and you start on the top of one side, that's unreliable. When you get something new, it's unreliable. But very quickly, it becomes very reliable. A new car or whatever, you shake the bugs out in a month or two. So now you're down at the bottom of the bathtub. And you go a long time on a nice flat bottom of the bathtub. But eventually you hit the other side and you gradually start to go up the bathtub curve again. And that's an aging phenomenon. It's actually a technical term, the bathtub curve, and it's an aging phenomenon. And the nuclear industry seems to forget that. The average nuclear plant in America now is more than 30 years old, and they were only designed for 40. So what they're suggesting is that, well, we can just kind of cut this bathtub in half and make it a little longer, and it'll be reliable for a longer period of time. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing these old plants break more frequently. Here in Vermont Yankee just sprung 5 leaks in the condenser just yesterday. It turned 40 last month, and then on 40, and 1 month later, it's got condenser leaks. Oyster Creek down in New Jersey to the south of you, when it turned 40, it sprung leaks. We seem to forget, or choose to forget, that as things get old, they break more frequently. And yet the nuclear engineers who operate these plants seem to think they can avoid a fact of nature. They can avoid the bathtub curve. Sooner or later, you got to hit that other wall and start going back up the unreliability curve. And I think as a nation, we're hitting that. We had a whole bunch more NRC teams that went out in the field last year than in the years past. And they're all aging-related problems. And the NRC saying, why is this happening? And they won't ask the question, they won't phrase the question in a way that they get the answer back. My God, these plants are getting old. We should expect it to happen.
To round out our domestic United States roundup of nuclear plant operational hazards, what is the latest up in your neck of the woods with Vermont Yankee, the reactor that is modeled after the Fukushima ones?
Well, the legislature voted to shut it down, and Entergy sued in federal court, claiming that federal preemption laws applied. There are federal preemption laws. The state cannot shut a nuclear plant down on safety reasons. Now, I was on the panel that recommended, that was chartered by the state of Vermont to look at this, and we were not allowed to look at safety. We were allowed to look only at reliability. And in fact, we determined things like this condenser were going to leak. We were sure of it, and it was going to be less reliable. But the federal judge turned it on its head, and he said, no, reliability was a code word, a secret code word. Everybody in Vermont was speaking the secret code, and that really when we talked about reliability, we were talking about safety, which was precluded. Now, there's all sorts of important national issues here about what legislatures can talk about that can be overridden by a judge. It was clear the legislature wrote into the law reliability, and the judge is now saying, well, I don't care what you wrote. I believe you meant safety. So it's on appeal. The state of Vermont is appealing, and Entergy is also appealing. They don't think the decision went far enough. Meanwhile, Vermont Yankee turned 40 on March 22nd. And continues to operate and will likely for years. You know, you can hire a lot of lawyers for probably the hundreds of millions of dollars it would take to repair that plant. So my guess is it'll be tied up in litigation and continuing to operate for 3 or 4 years, and at which point Entergy will have made hundreds of millions of more, even after you deduct out the lawyer's fees. So it's unfortunate. I think the will of the people of the state of Vermont has been overridden by a federal judge. And now it's down in your neck of the woods. The New York Circuit Court is going to be hearing the case.
We're speaking with Arnie Gundersen of Fairewinds Associates. And Arnie, to round out our discussion today, it seems that in Japan, that there are odd circumstances at the even-numbered reactors, in particular, Units 2 and 4. There are continuing concerns about the structural stability of the spent fuel tank in Unit 4. And I'm hearing that there are problems with the radiation levels in Unit number 2. Can you speak to those and, in fact, the overall condition of Fukushima?
Let's start with Unit 2. Unit 2 is the one that appears to be intact. It's got the box that's still intact around it. In fact, it had a meltdown, and in fact, it burst the containment, but they stayed inside the box as opposed to blowing the box to smithereens. And what TEPCO was able to do was to get a crew in there and push a camera with a radiation detector down, not into the nuclear reactor, but inside the containment. And they had thought that there would be between 30 and 35 feet of water inside the containment, which would have been a good thing because it would have meant there's enough water to cool and to shield the core so that people could eventually get inside the containment. Well, they got to the 30-foot level and there was no water. They got to the 20-foot level, the 10-foot level. They got down to 2 feet and they found water. So essentially the containment is leaking like a sieve, and whatever they're pouring in the top is running out the bottom, and the exposure levels were astronomical, 7,000 rem per hour. Now, you die after 1,000. So if you were in there for on the order of 10 minutes, you'd You would immediately die, not some long-term thing, but you would immediately die. Those radiation fields are comparable to what we see in space, and electronics in space gets fried. So now the question is, well, we can't send a person in, and likely we won't be able to send robots in either because the radiation fields are so bad. So Unit 2, no one knows how they're ever going to remove the fuel in my lifetime, and likely for 50, 60, 70 years until eventually some of this radiation decays away. Now, and that's the good news. Unit 1 and Unit 3 they can't get into because they're even worse. So moving on to Unit 4, Unit 4 didn't have any fuel in the reactor, and it blew up for, there's still a scientific debate about why it blew up, but it blew up. And all of the nuclear core is in the fuel pool, and the building is structurally severely damaged. Tokyo Electric went in, and one of the very first things they did back last summer when radiation levels were incredibly high was that they put jacks in underneath the pool floor because they were so worried about it cracking. The concern is you've got to get that fuel out. There's enough fuel there. If the pool were to break from a seismic event, or if the building were to topple from a seismic event, now, Brookhaven National Labs did a study, almost the identical reactor, and they determined that a fuel pool fire would ensue because the fuel remains physically hot, and that the fire would kill tens of thousands of people within a 50-mile range. So it's the kind of accident, if it were to happen, if there were to be a seismic event that either damaged the pool, even more than it's already damaged, or toppled the building, that's like a Richter 7 or a Richter 7.5, something like that. If that event occurred, we're right back to March of last year. You consider about evacuating Tokyo, it's going to be that bad.
What about the Humpty Dumpty tank in Unit 4?
I don't think Tokyo Electric has enough money to tackle the problems that it's facing.
That's exactly the problem. The spent fuel pool is elevated in a building that some people say is structurally unsound and perhaps even slightly off the vertical.
Yes, and all the King's horses and all the King's men. If it falls off that wall, it will crack and the fuel will be exposed to air. And once that happens, there's nothing you can do except let it burn. It will burn in air until it burns out, at which point all of that fuel product, there's enough fuel in that pool that it's almost as much cesium as in all of the atom bombs that were ever dropped in the atmosphere. 800 bombs were dropped in the atmosphere. Well, there's as much cesium in that one pool as those bombs. So, and of course, it will be local and it will be on the ground, and it could very easily cut Japan in half. Several Japanese ambassadors, including Akio Matsumura, have been pushing the Japanese government to force TEPCO to treat it like the emergency it is and get that fuel out of that reactor. That's got to be their top priority.
Our guest is Arnie Gundersen of Fairewinds Associates. He's a nuclear engineer, nuclear plant operator, an expert witness. And Arnie, we are very grateful for this roundup you've given us today. How can people be in touch, follow your work, help Fairewinds, and stay alert in regard to nuclear affairs?
Well, the Fairewinds website is updated frequently, and that's with an E in the middle, Fairewinds. Fairewinds website's updated regularly. If you want to get in touch with us, there's a contact button on the site, and if you'd like to make a donation, we're a 501c3. And Maggie and I aren't taking any money for this, but we do have to pay our camera and our web crews and stuff like that. So we would appreciate a donation if anybody can spring for it.
Well, thank you. That's fairewinds.org, and that's Arnie Gundersen, and it's once again great to have you with us on 5 o'clock Shadow, Arnie.
Thank you, Robert. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You know, WBAI and Pacifica have a long tradition in the coverage of nuclear affairs, and our meetings with remarkable people like Dr. Helen Caldecott, Arnie Gundersen, Harvey Wasserman, and so many others, including our extraordinary evening of not only nuclear issues, but wider issues of science, space, and technology from one of the most brilliant people on this planet. We'd like for you to join the Shadow Crew and all of the staff at WBAI at this event on May 7th at the Ethical Culture Society, and here are the details on how you can and should be there.
4th Street at Central Park West. For more information, go to WBAI.org.